What went wrong? We've been in this existential panic now for 50 years. What happened to our pianos? Where our watches go? How come our cars are going away? We don't have any manufacturing left. Like, let's just admit it. There is a problem to solve.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for March 17th through March 24th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we feature backdated 1-ounce gold Krugerrand at just $59 over spot. Next, Valcambi silver kilo bars are just $2.20 over spot per ounce. Pre-65 mixed junk silver is just $1.99 over spot, and pre-65 half dollars are just $2.25 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have a first-time guest today. Jeffrey Tucker is a senior economic correspondent at the Epoch Times. He also is the founder of the Brownstone Institute. He joins us this first time on Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us here this first time on Liberty and Finance.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I've been following your work for some time. I guess it was probably on the Epoch Times where I first noticed your writings. You are a prolific writer, and you are very thorough and in-depth in treating the subjects that you examine, and have a libertarian bent towards your philosophy. I appreciate that, as do our audience here on Liberty and Finance. And one article in particular, actually there were two that really grabbed my attention. The one I want to focus on primarily today is your question of the title, "Do Trade Deficits Matter?" It can sound a little bit like a dry topic to some people who wonder how that affects their daily life, but it was eye-opening to me as you explicated it during that interview, how it's intimately tied, both the fact that the existence of a trade deficit and the presence of the world reserve currency and its abuse all together can cause a dramatic overshoring of one industry after another until you basically just cannibalize all your industrial base. So these so-called unintended consequences of our actions that we think are going to be brilliant for our country often come back to bite us in the end. There's also another one, if we get time at the end, we can touch on as well, because I think it has wide-reaching implications as well. And that's your article here on the end of the managerial revolution. There's everyone can see where you are on the Epoch Times. So first on that topic of, do trade deficits matter? If you could just lead us through the major thought process there that was eye-opening for you, and certainly for me as I read the article.
Well, first, congratulations for reading the article. It is a topic about which I do not speak because there's too many moving parts and people quickly get bored, and it's hard to even talk about it without using seemingly technical language, and people get sick of it very quickly. So it's a major problem, which is why I don't write about it, because first of all, it's a difficult thing to understand. It's taken me a few years to fully integrate all the things, the moving parts, trade theory, monetary thing. And you know what's interesting to me about this is that economists themselves, whom we revere, right, typically, oh, you're an economist, you must know what's what. There's trade economists and there's monetary economists, and they typically don't talk to each other. Well, the problem with this topic is you have to understand both in order to get the bigger picture. So that means that trade theorists don't really understand this, and monetary theorists who don't talk about trade don't really understand this. So it makes it a difficult topic even to approach from a writing point of view. So that article on Do Trade Deficits Matter was my attempt to present my analysis to a popular audience in a way that maybe people could come to understand.
Well, I think you make it very accessible in there. Some of the eye-opening moments for me were when you connected the dots, and I really appreciated that, between the existence of a trade imbalance and the abuse of the reserve currency. that then forces basically, well, I guess populations around the world and other countries who are thinking for themselves and thinking on their feet think, well, then we're going to take over these various industries. Can you help people understand?
Yeah, it's been going on for 50 years, and it's strange to me that we're only now waking up to this. You know, this all began after the collapse of the gold standard for reasons we can discuss. But you know, in American life, it happened as follows: our costs of production were going up and up and up, and never adjusting down, and we faced a world that was increasingly open with low costs of production, low wages, and we decided to go into competition with them. And we kept wondering why we're losing. Why are we losing? America had the world's greatest watch industry between the 1830s and about the 1970s. We had all the infrastructure, all the supply chains, the markets, the reputational capital. We had everything in clocks and watches. And in just a matter of a couple of years, Japan wiped it out. I mean, it's unbelievable when you think about it. And you read the histories of this, and they say, well, it's because they had courts. Well, we didn't have courts. We couldn't, we were just like mystified. What is this courts thing? I guess we're gonna have to give up, close everything in Connecticut. It doesn't make any sense, right? And the same thing happened with pianos. So we were the world's greatest piano makers from the 1860s all the way up until, the post-war period, to really the 1970s. We had the techniques. We had acoustic pianos. We had the techniques. We had the markets. We had the skills. We had the infrastructure all in place, and then it was all wiped out. And it made no sense. But it was just simply a cost of production issue. Prices, wages were not equilibrating across countries. So other foreign countries were put in a permanent situation of having an advantage over the U.S. In ways that would never have been possible back when accounts settled. And we could talk about what that means. But anyway, then China opened up. And China saw what Japan was doing, and so targeted industry after, and then it accelerated. Then it's like an avalanche, right? So textiles, apparel, shipbuilding, tools, toys, home electronics. I mean, there was no industry that wasn't hit with this aggressive. And there's nothing wrong with competition, but it's like the U.S. had shackles and the other guy, was taking steroids, I mean, that's the way the competition was. So the U.S. just, and cars, of course, from Japan. I left that piece out. That's a very important piece.
Yeah, we all lived through that. That was a major thing going on in the late 70s and throughout.
Yeah, we've been in this existential panic now for 50 years. What happened to our pianos? Where our watches go? How come our cars are going away? Wait, we've got cotton. I buy our cotton. No, we're going to buy their cotton. Well, what about these clothes? No, we're going to buy that. What about our tools? Now we got better tools, and so on. It never stops, and we keep doing this decade after decade with this panic. Wait, what are we going to do? Well, there's nothing we can do. Well, what went wrong? And my point about writing about the trade deficit is that you can look at the trade deficit and see evidence of some big change. Not that the trade deficit itself is the problem, but rather it's an exhibit that reveals the underlying data problem. The problem is that the world the world adopted the dollar standard. The dollar became fiat, and there was an infinite demand for U.S. debt. So we had more regulations, more costs, more taxes, higher cost of production, more unionized industries here. And they had low cost of production and an infinite demand for dollars. And then also we started making debt because now the dollar is paper, and there was no downside to just printing more and more debt, running ever more debts. And there's an infinite market for debt-based dollar-based debt assets in foreign central banks and foreign manufacturing sectors. So it's become America has become a joke, so Biden decided to do something about it, said, all right, we're done. We're going to come up with a new industry, let's call it green energy. And we're going to manufacture solar panels and wind turbines and all become green. And then China's going to suck. Well, China's like, oh, that's funny. Get the binoculars out. What are they doing now? Oh, wind turbines and solar panels. All right, everybody get to work. Suddenly, we're completely outcompeted with green energy too. And then there's another solution. Well, the future is chips. So let's have a chip industry, but this time we're going to block the bad guys from abroad. And, there's a major problem because just like we had watches and pianos and textiles and toys and shipping and home electronics, they've always had the chip industry, and we never had one here. So we had a hell of a time, and still do, coming up with the chip industry. And then we decided we're going to lead on AI. And then that was the joke because, just last month, the Chinese programmer came up with using old NVIDIA chips, made an AI program that was a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the weight of anything being run by the U.S. So it's hopeless, right? I mean, we can have forever trade barriers, or we can compete and lose. That's our choice, and that's always going to be the choice so long as we don't have international clearing systems in place.
That key statement you made earlier, you said when we have trade that doesn't clear, and that's what's the poison pill that gets this on this non-virtuous cycle that you've been describing?
Well, so what does it mean to clear? I mean, that's really what we need to talk about, because it just sounds like it's Anglo-Saxon words, one syllable. It sounds easy, but but what does it mean, right? And there's where we need to go back. This is why I don't talk about this. You have to go back to David Hume, 17th century theorist, who was examining the problem of international trade. And he observed something really interesting. He said that a country that's importing things is a country that's importing lots of things is exporting money and importing goods. For the other country, it's exactly the opposite effect. So money is flowing from one country to the other in an exactly opposite direction of goods. So what happens, and you just have to think about it in binary sense, because David Hume is talking about this like England and France, right? So if England's importing a ton of goods and France is selling those goods, then France is going to have an importation of money and an export of goods, and England's going to have an import of goods and an export of money. So when the money stock in some other country rises, what happens to prices? They go up, right? And what happens in a country with an export of money and therefore a diminishing money stock? Those prices go down. So this adjustment back and forth is what keeps competition on the level playing field, you see? So you have to have flexible prices in both countries, and you have to have the same money used in the settlement of accounts. And David Hume said, see, England doesn't have to worry about competition for France. Let's let France do what it does best. We'll do what we do best, and everything works out, in the long run. And that was a really interesting insight. Adam Smith took it over. David Ricardo took it up, and came up with the law of one price, the law of one wage, right? And a perfect equilibrium. All countries will have the same price and the same wage in the long run because of the settlement mechanism. David Hume called it the price specie flow mechanism. Okay. At the cocktail party, this is where people say, shut up, change the subject. Right? It's too boring. The price specie flow mechanism was in operation for hundreds of years. My mentor, Gottfried Habler, who was, I would say, one of the great economists of the interwar period, wrote a book on depressions during the Depression. It's still a tremendous book. He was German, taught at Harvard. But in the 1940s, he was an architect of GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and a huge proponent of free trade. And if you look at his book on international trade, which nobody does, he has about 7 chapters in there on clearing, discussing the price specie flow mechanism of David Hume and how it works in the new system called Bretton Woods, where we had a gold standard. That gold standard did not allow for domestic convertibility, but it forced and mandated international convertibility. So when the U.S. would import goods, we'd export gold, and prices would rise in the foreign country, and then presumably they would decline in the U.S. At least there would be downward pressure on prices, and then we would become, an awesome producer and start exporting goods, and they would become the importers, right? So that's the way it works. And through this clearing system of gold shipments back and forth, you get an equilibrium established between two countries and then eventually all countries. And they had it all figured out, right? It all seemed to work. And they knew for sure that if this system ever broke down, that international trade would stop working, because an importing country where prices don't adjust downwards will be in an uncompetitive situation with the rest of the world and eventually lose all of its industry. Now, what I just said was well known and well understood by everybody. And I think even now, if you read a serious book on applied trade theory, for example, if you're studying for your, private credential, you're not going to learn this in PhD studies probably, but if you're getting your CFA or CFP or something like that, you're going to learn this. That a country can't forever become an importing country without price adjustments at home, or price adjustments abroad without losing all of its industries. So that's just it. You'll just end up like we are, with one exception, which is natural resources, right? So, if you don't have diamonds, you can't export diamonds. You've got to import diamonds. Okay, so natural resources are the one condition that is not subject, because you can make almost anything anywhere, but the one thing you can't make anywhere is natural resources. So here we are in 2025. What does the U.S. export? We export oil and we export debt. That's it. Everything else is more or less gone. Sorry, financial services and everything associated with debt. And then we export oil. We're trying to get people to buy our soybeans. Nobody wants them. Nobody wants our wheat, corn, all that crap. Right? But that's what we got surpluses of, and nobody wants them. So that's where we are.
Especially if it's genetically modified.
Yeah. There's that problem, and there's too much of it, and nobody trusts our food anywhere in the world, actually, for that very reason. So we're in a fix. We're in a real fix. So here's my point. I don't like protectionism. I don't like trade barriers. I don't like tariffs. I like free trade. But the people like me who are free traders are in denial about this problem. They pretend this is not even a big thing, And it's frustrating because it is a big thing. It's a huge thing. It's been going on 50 years. We don't have any manufacturing left. Like, let's just admit it. There is a problem to solve. You might not be able to solve that by autarky and protectionism, mercantilist policies. That it may not be the solution, but it's preposterous to talk as if there's no problem. And I will mention in passing another mentor of mine named Murray Rothbard, who, God rest his soul, he was a genius guy, but he was so afraid of tariffs and protectionism that he pretended like this is no big deal. He's like, yeah, so what? We get goods, they get worthless paper. Who cares? Well, it's easy to say, but when you have an economy with no manufacturing, no skills, nothing but a bunch of layabout, overclass professionals waving Harvard degrees, and that's your economy, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I have to just interrupt because as a grade school kid, walking to grade school, I remember talking with my siblings about, I felt like the little kid in the parade where he was the only one who said the emperor had no clothes on. It's like, how long is this going to keep going on? We keep getting all because I saw the Datsun cars going by and everything, and thinking, we get all the stuff and we're sending them paper dollars. And it seems like we're winning and they're losing, but there's something just eerily unsettling besides the fact that it felt like it's just unsustainable.
It's unsustainable. And what happens, and this is, again, I never want to take issue with Murray because his mentor is very good to me and so on. But there are things he overlooked in his analysis and saying they get worthless paper, we get great goods. What they do with this worthless paper is treated as an asset, and their central banks sock it away forever, and then use that as the basis of their own industrial policy and credit expansion, and build industries based on it. That's what Japan did, and that's what China does. And our dollars in central bank vaults all over the world, fueling manufacturing expansion at the expense of the U.S. And we're not hip to the game. We just keep cranking out the debt. Here's more debt. Here's more debt, and it's a serious problem. Hold on.
There's been lots of concern about the BRICS plus collaboration of countries that are getting together to establish a trade settlement currency between themselves, at least, that may be based at least partially on something real, something tangible. But also there's been concern about their awakening, especially after punishment with the weaponization of the SWIFT system, et cetera, that there's a geopolitical cost to carrying U.S. dollars and holding them and that sort of thing if they can be canceled or you could be locked out of the system. And there's been talk in our circles of all those dollars come flooding back to our shore like a tsunami, whether it's treasuries or dollars, and how destructive that would be on our financial life.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have a serious downgrading of the risk profile, risk premium of U.S. debt before we get that kind of thing happening. And I seriously doubt that's going to happen. I don't really imagine that is going to happen. What the Trump administration seems to be doing is trying to lower the exchange rate value of the dollar relative to other currencies. So there's two things operating here. If you read the paper by the new chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, he's a Harvard economist, and his paper that he wrote before going to work for the Trump administration on this whole subject is really, really good. And he talks about the absence of clearing and the wage differentials, especially between the U.S. and other countries, and how we can't win the struggle. So what he wants to do is use tariffs to serve as a proxy for clearing. So if we make imports vastly more expensive, then we're going to get more of on a competitive playing field. Just we'll reduce the trade deficit that way. So I read this article and it seems really speculative, like it's the sort of thing that works on paper, but and I appreciate the fact that he sees the problem, but whether and to what extent his solution can work in the real world is another issue entirely. A much more direct means of achieving the same thing would be to reduce the international value of the dollar relative to other countries. Like in the trade-weighted value of the dollar, it's got to be more or less the same as the euro and the yen and the yuan. You know, that's the only way. Because it's been overvalued for a very, very long time. You know, since the end of the gold standard, it's just been obviously wildly overvalued. So we've got to reduce that value. It's interesting because for Trump's part, he sees the dollar as the dominant currency in the world, as a position of strength. At the same time, he's trying to bring back American industry. Okay, those are incompatible. It's just math. You can't have both. It's not possible.
Well, this devaluing of your currency to be more competitive on the international trade sphere seems to be a shared strategy being used by countries all around the world. There's this race to the bottom. If you say we need to sharply devalue the dollar relative to other countries, we've already seen, and you can argue it any different way depending how you measure it, 96%, 98% or whatever of the value of the dollar in purchasing power. So you can start 1913, 1970, whatever. If we say we got to do dramatically more, is there a way to do that internationally without wiping out everyone's savings and earnings and retirements locally?
Again, this is why I don't like to talk about the subject. It's extremely important to distinguish two ways in which we talk about valuation. And they have essentially nothing to do with each other. So if I have a dollar, there's three things I can do with it. I can buy goods, I can buy services, or I can buy other currencies, right? So when I talk about reducing the value of the dollar internationally, I'm not talking about domestic goods and services. I'm talking about the value of the dollar relative to other currencies when you're in the currency market. You see the difference? So we've experienced like a 25% inflation over the last 4 years. At that very time, the value of the dollar on international exchange has gone up. So down domestically, up internationally. Those are really, really different things. So the dollar's never been, except in the last 2 weeks, never been as highly valued internationally, but it's never been as low valuation domestically. So it depends on what you're buying the dollars with. You can buy a lot of foreign currencies with a dollar, but not that many eggs. And you know this in practice because, I mean, the way to live, right, if you're going to say, well, how can I go about living the richest life possible? The way to live the richest life possible is to make dollars, to earn dollars, get them in your bank account, and spend them in some other foreign country, you know, Thailand, Mexico, you know, wherever it's going to be, because you're going to live like a king, you know. The only place that you can't live like a king on dollars is in the United States. You see what I mean?
I do. And now let me help me over one more difficulty I'm having, though, because it sounds like the whole story you've told us with this long arc from the 1700s till today goes a way of saying, gee, we had a system that was working because it was intrinsically balanced, because it had in the medium of exchange trade had intrinsic worth for goods, intrinsic worth for the money, the real money, the gold that was being used to settle international trade. But when we took the intrinsic value out of the money and it just became currency, that broke the intrinsic equilibrium of the system. It's what I'm hearing, and it reminds. And okay, we can slap tariffs on the top, say some current writers to accomplish the flight of industries out of our countries once we've done that to our currency. It sounds to me like all these medical ads I see on TV all the time where we're not going to cure the underlying condition. We're just going to treat it with more drugs on top to deal with the symptoms, which then bring their own problems on top. We haven't really addressed the question of returning to gold convertible as the way of intrinsically making the trade balance cause flight of industries.
So the reason why Hume's price specie flow mechanism worked was because for hundreds and hundreds of years, all currencies in all trading nations were different names for the same thing. Ultimately, we were all trading gold, silver, or whatever, mostly gold and silver, right? And some other commodity money. And that was the real money for the world was rooted in something physical, not paper, not infinite.
You had the Swiss francs, those were gold. You had the French francs, those were gold. You had the British something you could gold.
Yeah, it's not something you print. It's something that's real. Once that went away, settlement also went away, and that's when we got into the problems. So the long run solution to this thing is to restore a world where everybody in the world uses the same currency. How do we, which is to say gold, right? How do we get from here to there? I'm sorry, I just don't really have that answer. I don't know. But I also know that all the attempts to avoid this have not worked. So in 1985, James Baker, the Secretary of the Treasury, tried to do what was called the Plaza Accords. And the Plaza Accords were going to fix exchange rates all over the world so that you could fire up settlement again, you know, so that there would be a fixed relationship between the dollar and the yen and the this and the that, and everybody would adhere to it. But that broke down in like 2 seconds. I mean, it didn't happen. So, but the Bretton Woods system also broke down because the U.S. was shipping out too much gold, and we're like, oh, this is not working, and because the U.S. never allowed prices to adjust downwards, inflating everything all the time, the settlement broke there too. So it's, you know, and so that broke. So the only real solution is to go back to a gold standard of the sort that we had in the 1890s, really. But I don't know how to get from here to there. I mean, if somebody put me in charge, I'm sure I'd mess it up.
Well, when you say that the flight of the gold on the Bretton Woods standard was a problem out of the U.S., it was. But wasn't that a symptom of that we've been living artificially high on the hog through cheating for decades and decades, and now this was the reconciling of the books? Yeah,
and you know, you think about what broke down Bretton Woods. It was Bretton Woods went into place in like 1944. And so we went through the 1950s without a whole lot of fiscal expansion, not a whole lot of demand, and not much inflation, and life was good. The 60s came, suddenly it was like, you know, oh, we can have a welfare state, and we can have a big war, and we can just live high on the hog, and, you know, all the rest of it. So it was that spending that broke it. And so by 1968 through 1973, it was, you know, the whole system just came apart, and Nixon panicked and said, okay, this is not working. We're going to innovate a great new system where the paper dollar will be the world's reserve currency, and there will never be settlement again. Oh, great.
And oh, by the way, we reserve the right to make as many of those paper dollars as we choose to. So that it seems to be we're gonna have to get back to this in a future visit, because there's several directions that this takes that I think that will be fruitful. One of them is this: we keep dancing around, we, meaning the greater we, for maybe centuries here, and certainly in the U.S., dancing around this notion that if you do something that's intrinsically unjust, it's going to bite you in the end. And that seems like this idea that you can live at the expense of others. If you're just clever enough, you can figure out, I mean, in this sense, it's kind of like a new kind of feudalism, or a new kind of imperialism, or a new kind of theft, and eventually you end up, you know, stealing from the foreign nations, or you think you are, and then they end up eating your lunch in your industry, and you end up stealing from your own people through inflation, and all their jobs are gone. So the idea, the notion that, hey, this is a great idea, kids. Let's put on a show. Let's make it so that other people have to work and we don't have to work, but we get to live on the high life. Seems like it bites you in the end.
Yeah, and there are and I don't want to leave us here with a sense of despair that can be done about it. There are very specific things we can do about this. One is to stop the debt creation, right? So if we stop exporting U.S. debt around the world, that robs foreign central banks of the ability to use that debt as collateral to expand their own domestic manufacturing. So that's an easy solution, like stop running debts. That would go a long way towards at least taking away the manufacturing advantage of every country in the entire world. Okay, they're living at our expense. So that would be one step. The second step is to lower the cost of production in those countries. So deregulate to make business easier. Get rid of payroll taxes that are a huge expense for a business. Get rid of mandates for healthcare so that business could, for example, just start and hire people and sell things. That would be a nice thing. So, deregulation, massive elimination of tax burdens and paperwork could, combined with the elimination of debt creation that serves as collateral for foreign manufacturing expansion, those two factors could go a very long way to solving the problem, and it might be enough, to fix it. But and I think those two things hold out a better prospect for success than just simply taxing people for importing goods. I mean, I'm not sure I buy that.
Well, it almost seems like shooting the messenger. It's like nature is trying to tell you something here, and you're basically, if someone's running to you and saying, "Here, I'm gonna send you foreign-made goods because they were made less expensively," and all this sort of thing, and they're made by methods that you wouldn't want in your backyard. So, got to resolve that somehow or another. But anyway, you're shooting the messenger by saying, "How dare you outdo us at industrialization?"
I mean, and Trump keeps saying he's taxing foreign countries. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but that is just not true. Tariffs are not a tax on foreign countries. The U.S. Tax authorities have no ability to tax anyone in China. That is just untrue. It is a tax on American business and American consumers. That's what tariffs are, and there's no getting around that. I mean, the White House spokesman the other day got in an argument with an AP reporter about this, and MAGA was like, "Yeah, we showed that AP reporter a thing or two." Well, I'm sorry, but the AP reporter was exactly right. I mean, tariffs are a tax on Americans. They're not a tax on foreign countries, and it's just there's no getting around that basic point. So I'm not sure that really helps anything. And I'm unaware. The other thing is that if you have a domestic business that starts solely based on the fact that the same product he's about to make is made much more cheaply and a higher quality abroad, but we can't get it here because it's too expensive due to taxes, that is not a good basis for business, right?
This is a very good point you just made, because we're in an era now, a turning of the page, where the idea that there should be equal outcomes as being now thrown back into disfavor. Now we're going to make it based on actual capability, your actual whether you're prepared for the job, not just whether you have the right fall into the right category. So here we are going, yeah, but when it comes to manufacturing efficiency and quality, we want equal outcomes for ourselves. And
yeah.
Wait a minute, that doesn't sound like...
It's not good. And I don't think you make America great again by becoming an isolated, protected, mercantilist, autarkist, the internal trade zone. I mean, that's weird. It's not a sustainable model for the long run. I think Cuba tried that. It didn't work. So this is not viable. The U.S. is going to have to compete abroad. But it would be nice if we could compete with a really highly competitive domestic economy. And that's a good step. And the truth is that we've got a lot of smart people in the U.S. and a lot of passion. What we lack is that thing, which is sufficient amounts of liberty to fire it up. So deregulation and tax cuts are going to be the key to making America competitive, not tariffs, I'm sorry to say. Trump has an obsession with tariffs. And, you know, I have tried to, I've done my best to make a case for his revenue tariff idea as a replacement for income taxes, and I think on net that would be a good thing. But you see the contradiction. You can either use tariffs to block trade, or you can use tariffs to earn money for yourself. Those are incompatible. If you want to earn money, you've got to permit more trade. If you want to protect your industry, you need less trade. Those are inconsistent. And again, it's frustrating because like we're not hearing any kind of talk about this. What are the tariffs for? Are we trying to protect industry or make money? Because you can't do both.
Yeah, that's the old saying. Yeah, whatever you subsidize, you get more of. Whatever you tax, you get less of. And if you're taxing trade, you're going to get less of it.
Yeah, and therefore less revenue.
We want to circle back with you in the future on this other article, which I didn't get time to get to today, The End of the Managerial Revolution, where you talk about the loss of confidence in expertise and experts in general. I think we've had a lot of glaring reasons in the last 4 years to doubt and to be skeptical of the pronouncements of experts, and we'd love to get into that with you. Jeffrey Tucker, founder of the Brownstone Institute and chief correspondent on columns, on economics at the Epoch Times. Thank you for joining us this first time on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks for putting up with my long explanations. I appreciate it.
You'll find that our viewers and subscribers are fairly patient and really interested in probing the underlying fundamentals of things. So don't be bashful about that. So Thank you for joining us. And folks, if you don't want to miss a single episode that's upcoming with Jeffrey in the future, I hope, and all of our other guests, make sure you're subscribed for free to our free newsletter at libertyandfinance.com. Libertyandfinance.com. Put in your email address, click submit. Make sure you confirm on the confirming email. You'll get 1 email per day, and we won't share your email address with anyone. And you won't miss a single episode with Jeffrey or any of our other guests. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us again here on Liberty and Finance.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for March 17th through March 24th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we feature backdated 1-ounce gold Krugerrand at just $59 over spot. Next, Valcambi silver kilo bars are just $2.20 over spot per ounce. Pre-65 mixed junk silver is just $1.99 over spot, and pre-65 half dollars are just $2.25 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.